It's a pleasure to welcome Dane Wigington to the program. He is lead researcher for Geoengineeringwatch.org. Dane, pleasure to have you on. The topic today is chemtrails. For people who may not know what these are, let's just start there. What are chemtrails?
Chemtrails is a layman's term, David, for geoengineering, which is climate engineering, also known as solar radiation management. So in this case, the science terms are very important. The semantics are important so that people find hard science data and not conspiracy theory. So this is an attempt to modify the Earth's climate systems. There's a number of stated reasons for this. Again, one is solar radiation management. That would be a primary reason stated by numerous patents. We have about 150 patents on these programs, and we have global governance documents from Congress, the UN, and so forth. So the primary stated purpose, David, is to slow a runaway greenhouse effect by filling the atmosphere with light scattering reflective particulates. In this case, we're talking about heavy metals. The primary element is aluminum. So these programs are quite damaging to the human health organism and the climate system as a whole. So
and how are these elements dispersed? I think that's a key question.
Aircraft disbursement. Yes, this is intentional payload disbursement from aircraft. There may be some method of disbursement by mixing additives in fuel, but we have patents, film footage of spray disbursements with material coming out of nozzles on aircraft. So this is an intentional effort to saturate the atmosphere with reflective light scattering particulates for the purpose of solar radiation management.
And again, speaking in layman's terms, when we see often, for people to kind of link this with what we see sometimes on the internet, are those images where we sometimes see what seem to be streams of either air or liquid coming from the back of an airplane? Is that what we're talking about here?
It is. And people have been led to believe that anything they see in the sky is a condensation trail. And quite simply, the science doesn't hold up in this case. People should be able to distinguish for themselves. When you see a grid pattern one day and nothing the next, obviously there's something going on. And we know from the type of jet engine on most of these aircraft, David, a high bypass turbofan jet engine, which we have a tutorial on geoengineeringwatch.org so people can see how this engine functions. For all practical purposes, it's incapable of putting out a condensation trail except under the most extreme circumstances. So we have film footage of this happening at altitude. People can view these videos at geoengineeringwatch.org or other sites. So we know that they're spraying from aircraft.
So let's go through a couple pieces. First, just you mentioned that we want to separate this from conspiracy theory. And I think it's interesting to use that term because some people do consider this a conspiracy theory. So first, just to provide some context for the audience, are there other so-called conspiracy theories that you subscribe to? In other words, do you believe that the U.S. Landed a man on the moon, for example?
You know, I'm not researched in other areas, and I don't want to go into those areas because I'm not research and I have no opinion. I can only state in this case we have film footage of it happening, so there's no theory involved. We have about 100 lab tests in Northern California, hundreds from across the globe that show that these metals are falling down on us, raining down on us.
No, but Dane, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to get to that, but just to push back a little bit on this, in preparing for this interview, it seemed like on June 6th on the USA Prepares radio show, you did say that you found it incredibly unlikely that we landed anyone on the moon and that we sent a buggy up there.
Here's what I said, David. I said this, that I think it's interesting that we could leap up there in 1969 and nobody's been back. That's all I said. And that's all I will say. And I do find that interesting. I think it's interesting that nobody's ever been back, but that's all I said.
Okay, good. No, I just want to make sure that all the information I have is accurate and that you did address that on that program and you're saying that you did. So let's get now, I want to get into some of the specifics though, of the chemtrails.
I hope it's clear that that's all I said. I mean, I do find that interesting and I stand by that.
That's perfectly fair. Yeah, no, we're not going anywhere beyond that. I want to talk first, there's just so much of this, and as a layman, it's hard to wrap your mind around everything related to chemtrails. I want to first talk a little bit about the aluminum specifically, right? The claims about aluminum. I did some research about this and I went into it with an open mind. And what I found was that there are some air analyses that have been done. For example, one from Phoenix, which show levels of aluminum and barium that are so high that if the test were accurate, we would all be dead. That was kind of one set of studies that I found. And then the other set of studies that I found showed that while there were some levels of these heavy metals in the air, that they were equal to or lower than what we would consider kind of the normal levels that are not in any way a red flag and don't suggest that any have been added. So how would you counter that data?
Well, I can't speak for a test in Phoenix that I didn't do, but I can speak to tests in Northern California, some of which were done by U.S. Forest Service biologists whom I work with, and all of these tests were done at the state-certified lab. There's a massive amount of aluminum, barium, strontium, other metals falling down in our rain. Now, if this was normal, David, it would not affect aquatic insect life as it has in Northern California. In fact, we've seen a 90% decline, 90, of aquatic insect life in Northern California, 90% terrestrial insect life decline. We've seen aluminum escalate in the rain tests from a baseline that was already high of 7 parts per billion to 3,450 parts per billion in a single rain event. This is highly toxic rain. There's nothing normal about this, and people have been led to believe aluminum is abundant, so it's common to find it in the rain. This is absolutely ludicrous. Aluminum is always bonded to other elements. It should not be in our rain unless you live in a Sahara dust storm. And quite simply, it wasn't there before. The aquatic insect life would have already been dead.
Now, Dane, as a scientist, if the and I ask this question not rhetorically, but because I want to learn from you, if these numbers are indeed accurate from Northern California, as you state, how, as a scientist, did you look beyond the correlation of that data and actually link beyond a reasonable doubt the reduction of aquatic insect life to so-called aluminum that has been released by airplanes in the air? How did you link those two things to go beyond simply correlation and to causation?
This is what we've always called for, David. When we know this metal's falling on us, we know it wasn't there before. We know from California Air Resources Board it's not coming from China, as a lot of people would like to assume. And we know it's in extremely toxic levels, so much so that it's changing force floor pHs 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. We know this as well because we tested. I've been in the field with USDA soil scientists, and we've verified this fact. So bottom line is there's a massive contamination. It matches the climate engineering patterns exactly. My background with Bechtel Power is with renewable energy. We have so much of whatever's coming out from behind these aircraft obscuring our skies that it's blocking 70-80% of my solar uptake, which is the exact goal of geoengineering. When every single dot connects, we're simply saying that an investigation is justified here. We know we have a contamination issue. It's indisputable. We know we have massive UV radiation issues now, which is also a known consequence of climate engineering. So again, we have an awful lot of
right, but you're still not telling. So in other words, we also know that we have there are significant effects to fracking and oil drilling. We have incredible amounts of plastic trash in the Pacific Ocean, right? There are so many other factors which you're not even considering here. You're simply saying, hey, we see this when we measure the atmosphere and we see this happening to aquatic insect life, but you're not putting anything together in terms of a causal relationship. You haven't stated anything, at least.
When you have patents that state the express goal of spraying aluminum from the back of aircraft, when we see this happening, we have film footage of it happening, in fact. When you have the world's most recognized geoengineers stating on the record that their intent is to dump 20 million tons of aluminum nanoparticulates into the atmosphere annually,
right?
And you have global governance documents from the UN, from Congress, at what point do we say that all these dots match up? And certainly this contamination is coming from somewhere.
Right, but again, Dane, I don't want to belabor the issue, but again, that's 3 times.
Where do you think it's coming from, David? I would ask you, where do you think this contamination is coming from? Because it's new.
I'm not, but that's the thing. I'm not a scientist. This, Dane, now by asking me that question, you're going down the same path that the religious extremists go down.
No,
Hold on though, Dane. Let me get the question out. It's not fair not to let me get the question out.
Well, I'd like to answer that question. We have film footage of it happening. So when you ask me about this as if it's a theory, when we have film of KC-10s, KC-135, C-17 Globemasters, all spraying at altitude with nozzles visible, I don't know where the speculation is here.
What I'm saying is something else, though, Dane, and you interrupted me when I was trying to get to it, which is you're not putting together a causal relationship. You're putting together a correlation here, and that's not good science. But let's pause for a second, because I don't want to only focus on this, because I have so much else to talk about. And we'll provide all of your website information. People will have a chance to do all the research, so don't worry about that. I want to talk about when we see planes that appear to be visually spraying. Okay, I focused a lot of my research for this interview on this, and in fact, I happen to live in New York City. I live in Brooklyn, which is basically at the epicenter of three major airports: LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark Airport. So let's go through my observations piece by piece, and then I'll let you tell me where I'm kind of going wrong here. The grid patterns that have been identified, okay? Because of the takeoff directions that yesterday, based on the way the wind was going, that were being used at these three airports, you could see what would be maybe casually in layman's terms considered airplane chemtrail lines going from all three of these airports. And as I looked above, there was indeed a grid pattern, because the takeoff patterns intersected. And it didn't seem to me at all like this was anything remotely unusual. I went back and found pictures from very early aviation where we saw the same grid pattern. Connect the grid pattern to proof that this is heavy metals being released into the atmosphere.
First, when you say very early pictures, we know these programs have existed since the late 40s, so we would expect to see such pictures. Second, over Northern California, we've pulled all FAA flight paths. We do not have east-west flights above us, but yet we have east-west grid patterns on numerous days. We pulled, through a congressional rep, the FAA GPS flight tracking records showing these planes making loops, literal loops. You can't get these GPS records without congressional approval from state representatives. So we know that these planes are making completely non-conventional flight paths all over the state. We know this. I mean, we're not guessing.
Couldn't it be, Dane, and I asked this, couldn't it be that even though they're not making what would be considered a traditional commercial or transportative airplane flight pattern, that they could be doing other things which, in my research, again, this is just my research, going into this with an open mind, have all been identified, right? Sometimes these so-called chemtrails are... hold on a second, Dane. Hold on. Please let me get the question out.
No, I don't think that you're trying to be objective here when you refuse to use the science terms. I don't think that's being objective.
Tell me the term I should use, and I'll phrase my question in that
climate engineering, stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection.
But those terms imply proof of something that I haven't seen proof of. So can we find a term that would be more neutral we can use for what
Climate engineering, that's what we're talking about.
No, but unfortunately, let me pick a term that I think is maybe more neutral. Can I call them so-called chemtrails? Would that be fair?
You can't possibly believe I would think that that's being objective. Of course I don't. This is stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. You have a mountain of science to back it up. And if you use the terms you're using, you come to conspiracy theory on Wikipedia instead of hard science. And it seems that's the primary tool the journalists use to try to discredit an issue that has a mountain of science to back it up.
I don't know about that. I didn't use Wikipedia at all for my research. The point I'm kind of going to is this. In my research, Dane, and again, just let me get the question out, and I've provided you certainly time to respond here. It seems to me that all of these visual phenomena, let me call them that some in your field call stratospheric geoengineering, have been explained as a combination of, and I'll just state this and then you'll have a chance to respond: fuel dumping, smoke generators to study wake vortices, tankers that release fire retardant for fighting fires or training for fighting fires. Some engines release exhaust, some airplanes have flares, and then, as you mentioned, there is the maybe albeit rare but existent condensation. So what proof do we have, and when I say proof, I mean actual proof, that this is aluminum being deliberately released for climate engineering purposes? What proof do we have?
Well, first, David, when you say that we should feel better about something being a fuel dump, as if that would make things any better, I don't find that any better. And two,
but that's a different argument.
When we have film footage, you don't dump fire retardant at 30,000 feet, okay? When you have military aircraft on film spraying from nozzles, and you have the same material listed in those patents showing up on the ground, I challenge anybody to look at the data. And when you talk about your research, I don't think that it's really qualified as research to say you observed a few trails above the airports near you. We've done years of hard research. We have film footage of this happening. We have numerous lab tests. We have science documents. In fact, let's go back to 1966. People can look this up. If they look up 1966 government document geoengineering, they'll find an 80-page presidential document that outlines the scope and scale of these programs as of 1966, 10 federal agencies involved, 12 major universities involved, budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. That's hard proof, David, and people need to investigate it. Again, if they look at the science, they'll find hard proof to back this up, historical proof of these programs.
Fair enough. I will allow that to be the last word on this. We have gone over our time. What I would recommend to the audience to do is the following. Visit Dane's website, geoengineeringwatch.org. Look individually at each of the claims that is made, and then research each claim individually, because I think that's the key to unpacking these hypotheses, which is step back from the broader theory and look at each piece that is said to make it up. We've been speaking with Dane Wigington, lead engineer, geoengineeringwatch.org. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.